Welcome back to Module 3 of Intro to Operating Systems. I'm your professor, Professor Visky, and let's get back into virtualization. We talked a little bit about virtualization as, the historical context of it and the fact that it's everywhere. Now let's talk about the types of virtualization. The ones that you more than likely will run into when you are an IT professional and or just a user in a network. We have data virtualization. And data virtualization normally happens when we need our data that is accessible in more than one thread. And so what data virtualization actually does for us is it allows us to have one hardware device which is behind something called a hypervisor. What's a hypervisor? Hypervisor is the way we virtualize things. Obviously, we need software on top of the hardware to make the hardware act like it's multiple PCs or multiple operating systems or multiple data platforms or multiple desktops than just one. So the hypervisor is the software component that sits on top of your hardware, and then it produces logical outcomes, a logical data virtualized instance that you can connect to. Normally, when we do data virtualization, we do it in the form of what's called pools. We have pools that allow us to connect virtually to a specific data instance if necessary. Another way to ingest data virtualization is using APIs. The next piece of virtualization I want to talk about is desktop virtualization. Desktop virtualization is taking one desktop hardware device, like a server, if you will, something with a lot of power, and then chopping it up into multiple smaller components so that it can be ingested by a user, just like you see here on my screen, as a desktop operating system. Now, the same thing happens in this case. It's just that the hypervisor is a little different because it needs to cater to desktop type operating system software and not data platform type software. Now, desktop virtualization was all the rage a few years ago, and I think it's still being rolled out within a lot of global firms because it allows the footprint of hardware devices to be dramatically reduced. Now, one of the biggest drawbacks to desktop virtualization is the size and scope of your desktop virtualization can really drive up cost. So, if you have 200, 300, 400,000 users that you're trying to put on a few servers that are virtualized for VDI, once again, virtual desktops, then at the end of the day, you may run into situations where you might not have enough IP spaces, you might not have enough licenses, the cost of licenses goes up based on the volume of licenses being used, and yada, yada, yada. You can see how the cost can go up dramatically, and that's one of the biggest drawbacks to desktop virtualization. It hasn't slowed it down, but it has made finance departments a little wary of implementing it on the idea that, we only need one server, 2 servers, 3 servers in a data center in the cloud or something like that, when in all actuality, that's not the case. We have server virtualization, and this is the virtualization that I've seen the most, right? And this is the one we started with first. I spoke in the last module, or not the last module, in the last lecture, virtualization, the history of virtualization, that at the end of the day, server virtualization is really where the rubber meets the road. You're taking one server, one hardware server, normally a blade of some kind in a rack, and you're virtualizing that using a hypervisor. And that hypervisor can be provided by VMware, it can be provided by Microsoft itself, and things like that. And you get multiple virtual machines from one big server. The idea of server virtualization has not gone away, and server virtualization is still used in a great capacity at the cloud computing level at a very much so specific way. So, for instance, server virtualization can be Dockerized, which means that it can be chopped up even more, ensuring it can be more efficient than just having one server that runs a VM, so the VM having an operating system on it. And in certain situations, you might only have one thing running in that operating system, and that in and of itself may not necessarily need all the power that's in that VM. You can Dockerize things, and what that essentially does is it allows for that specific virtual machine to have only the resources that it actually needs and dynamically pull from the hardware or the hypervisor when it needs more or less. Docker is normally used for virtualizing applications, less than virtualizing operating systems, but you can. The cons to server virtualization have been mitigated completely because majority of the IT structure now is componentized. It's been decentralized. So if you walk into an IT shop, if you can find one. Normally, this is what cloud computing does now. But back in the day, about 10 years ago, when we had our own data centers, in your data center, you had a storage team which took care of your LUNs and your storage locations and devices. Equal logic. I'm dating myself right now, so please forgive me, and things like that. You had your network team, which ensured that all things network related worked the way it did. It worked the way it was supposed to, based on OSI layers 1, 2, and 3, with switching and modems and the physical layer. Then you had your software development, which was normally a not large team in a data center. It was there really to serve a lot of the things that were going on in the within the context of the organization. And then you had your server administrators, which took care of things like virtualization, firewalls, big IP net scaling, clustering, all that stuff. The last type of virtualization I want to discuss is operating system virtualization. And I think this is the one that everybody in this class is probably the most interested in. The one thing about operating system virtualization is that virtualizing your operating system is not as easy as it sounds, because what you need to do is you need to take one operating system that's hosted on one PC and chop it up into multiple. Now, you might not know this, and I'm going to tell you this anyway. Your box, your laptop, your desktop is already virtualized, and it is already set up to be virtualized. Now, please don't be scared by this. This is something that it allows the common person like yourself and I to either train on virtualization and or look at how to utilize it in our day-to-day or even in a small business setting. Virtualization at your operating system level is normally already done. And so all you need to do is find out how to find the next virtual machine on your box or the next screen. Now on Windows, you can use the Windows key to flip between the virtual instances of your operating system, which are already spawned. You should have at least 4 in Windows 11 and at least 2 in Windows 10. I do not know about Apple or Linux, but I do know Windows already has it. And that is that. We can talk about network functions virtualization, but in the end, that's been around for a very long time in the form of virtual network devices that we find in our virtualized hypervisor and things like that, or as subsets of things that your network already does. And that's that. Well, if you've liked this video, please like and subscribe. It really does help me understand the content you're looking for, and it helps me know if you still think this content is relevant. And as I say in all my videos, good luck, have fun, ciao.